July 28, 2026, 11:47 p.m. local time. The outer harbor at Novorossiysk has the particular stillness that port cities manufacture. Diesel exhaust, salt water, the low throb of generators running below deck on tankers riding at anchor. 17 vessels are staged in the outer approach basin, waiting for escort clearance. The escort tugboat Cutlass idles 300 meters off the main breakwater. Her crew of 11 thinks this is a routine shift. Routine ended 6 weeks ago. They just don't know it yet. Welcome to Steel Horizon. I'm your host, and what you're about to hear is the full operational reconstruction of the strike that defense analysts are calling the most strategically precise maritime operation of this entire war. By the time this analysis is finished, you'll understand exactly how Ukraine's naval drone units turned Russia's last functioning export corridor into a kill zone, and why that matters for every month of this war that follows. This is the Novorossiysk operation. It begins not on the water, but in a signals intelligence room somewhere in western Ukraine, 6 weeks before the first drone entered the harbor approach. To understand what Ukraine did to Novorossiysk in late July and early August 2026, you have to understand what Novorossiysk had become. By early June 2026, Moscow's maritime logistics had suffered a quiet catastrophe. The Kerch Strait, that narrow choke point connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Azov, had become functionally unusable for Russian Shadow Fleet tanker traffic. Ukrainian Magura V5 naval drones had turned the Kerch approaches into a recurring ambush corridor. In 4 months, 6 tanker escorts and 1 fuel barge were struck. Insurance underwriters stopped covering Shadow Fleet vessels on that route entirely. Moscow's response was logical and, in hindsight, catastrophically predictable. Reroute everything through Novorossiysk. The port had the infrastructure. It had coastal defense batteries. It had a naval patrol presence. It felt safe. Russian Black Sea Fleet Command concentrated their remaining escort assets here. The fast patrol craft, armed tugboats, the fuel support barges that kept the Shadow Fleet operational. Oil revenues through this single port were funding between 12 and 15% of Moscow's active defense budget, according to Ukrainian intelligence estimates reviewed by Steel Horizon analysts using open-source financial tracking. Ukraine watched this consolidation happen in real time, and Ukraine made a decision. The planning window opened in mid-June 2026. GUR, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, and the Naval Special Operations drone units began a systematic intelligence collection effort targeting Novorossiysk's operational patterns. 6 weeks of methodical, layered surveillance combining commercial satellite imagery, signals intercepts, and human intelligence from within the port's civilian logistics workforce. Every 12 hours, updated satellite passes over the outer harbor were processed and analyzed. Escort vessel departure times, patrol routes, anchorage positions, refueling schedules. All of it mapped, cross-referenced, refined. Which weapon system was most decisive in this operation? Magura V5 sea drones, electronic warfare suppression, or satellite-guided targeting? A. Magura V5B, electronic warfare C, satellite targeting. Drop your answer in the comments. We'll come back to this. I spent hours going through the open-source intelligence record on this operation. The commercial satellite imagery logs, the intercepted Port Authority radio traffic released by Ukrainian intelligence, and one detail kept pulling my attention back. Russia had positioned its escort assets at Novorossiysk not just because the port was geographically safer, but because their threat assessment for Magura V5 drone range had a hard ceiling. Russian naval planners believed the operational radius was approximately 450 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled coastline. Novorossiysk sits at approximately 590 kilometers. In Russian threat matrix calculations, that 140-kilometer margin was their safety buffer. Their entire defensive posture was built around a range estimate that Ukraine's engineers had already quietly exceeded. The Magura V5 began its operational life as a 5.5-meter semi-submersible surface drone carrying a 320-kilogram warhead at speeds up to 42 knots, with range initially rated at 400 to 450 kilometers. What Ukrainian engineers quietly delivered by early 2026 was a modified configuration, referred to in open-source documentation as the Magura V5 Extended, with operational range exceeding 600 kilometers under optimal sea conditions. No press conference, no announcement. The first public confirmation came from the wreckage analysis of the vessels this drone helped destroy. Russian Black Sea Naval Command didn't know their safety margin was gone. That assumption became the architecture of their defeat. Stay with me, because what happens in the next phase of Ukrainian planning reveals something about modern warfare intelligence that most conventional military doctrine still hasn't fully absorbed. By the third week of July 2026, GUR's analytical team had completed a pattern of life assessment for Novorossiysk's escort operations. 6 critical vulnerabilities identified. First, escort vessel patrol routes were repetitive, following the same nautical mile corridors on roughly 4-hour rotations. Second, the refueling schedule for patrol craft created predictable windows of reduced patrol density, specifically between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. local time, when 2 of the 4 active patrol boats were typically at the inner harbor fuel pier. Third, Novorossiysk's coastal radar coverage had a degraded sector on the southwestern approach bearing, a gap identified through analysis of radar emission patterns. Fourth, Russian naval commanders had concentrated their Crossika series ECM systems inland, protecting high-value air defense nodes, not maritime approaches. Fifth, civilian vessel traffic created persistent radar clutter that made discrimination of small surface contacts genuinely difficult. And sixth, perhaps most critically, the tugboat escort radio schedule had been fully mapped by Ukrainian signals intelligence. The operation was set for July 28th into July 29th, 2026. A 72-hour window, 3 waves. Wave 1 targeting patrol craft on predictable routes. Wave 2 targeting escort tugboats. Wave 3 targeting the fuel barge infrastructure the shadow fleet required to function. Ukrainian drone operators had a name for the operation internally, which has not been officially confirmed but appears in intercepts reviewed by Steel Horizon. They called it Povertanya, the return. The strategy that Novorossiysk thought it had escaped from Kerch had simply followed it home. Subscribe to Steel Horizon if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Because what we're about to walk through is a masterclass in layered maritime strike planning that military academies will be dissecting for decades. The night of July 28th begins with the obstacle that nearly collapsed the entire first wave before it launched. At 6:15 p.m. local time, 6 hours before the planned drone insertion window, a weather system moved over the northeastern Black Sea faster than models had predicted. Wind speeds at the outer harbor reached 22 to 24 knots. Sea state conditions degraded to Beaufort Scale 4, the upper operational threshold for Magura V5 drones in standard configuration. Ukrainian drone unit commanders faced a stark choice: delay the operation 24 hours and risk the intelligence window closing, or launch at the edge of the performance envelope. A Russian patrol vessel confirmed at a specific waypoint at 11:45 p.m. might not be there the following night. The intelligence picture had an expiration. Ukrainian commanders launched at reduced complement. Instead of the planned 6-drone first wave, they launched 4. 2 drones were held back because their mission profiles required calmer sea conditions. 4 Magura V5 extended drones entered the water from a mobile maritime platform in international waters at 9:23 p.m. They ran at reduced speed, 28 knots instead of the standard 42, to preserve hull stability. Their guidance systems shifted to a modified sea state algorithm built for conditions like this. What's most surprising about this operation isn't how many vessels Ukraine destroyed. It's that the first wave succeeded at all given those conditions, and that the decision to launch in degraded weather was ultimately validated by everything that followed. The 4 drones covered approximately 590 kilometers of open water across roughly 9 hours and 40 minutes at reduced speed. They ran in dispersed formation, no closer than 800 meters apart, to minimize radar signature. Each drone threaded a pre-planned route that exploited the identified southwestern radar coverage gap, adding 45 kilometers of travel distance but threading a corridor where Russian coastal radar returns were weakest. At 11:47 p.m., Drone Unit Alpha reached its terminal approach corridor. Target, a Vasily Baikov-class fast patrol vessel operating on the northern sector of the outer harbor rotation. She had been on Ukrainian target lists since February 2025. She carried anti-drone countermeasures. Her crew was trained. At 11:47 p.m., that crew was completing a route check, and the radar operator was managing a screen cluttered with returns from 17 anchored vessels in the approach basin. The Magura V5 runs semi-submerged on terminal approach. Its radar cross-section at that profile, approximately 0.03 to 0.05 square meters, comparable to a large floating debris field. At 11:49 p.m., the drone impacted the patrol craft amidships, below the waterline on the port side. The 320-kilogram warhead detonated against unarmored hull plating. Combat footage analysis released by Ukrainian military intelligence shows secondary explosions consistent with the vessel's fuel reserve breaching within 12 seconds of the initial detonation. The patrol craft sank in approximately 6 minutes. The harbor went to alert status. Russian Naval Command initiated emergency response. Patrol boats ordered to maximum speed defensive positioning, radar operators switching to high scan rate mode, coastal defense batteries activated. In the chaos of that response, the second and third drones of the first wave reached their approach corridors. How many vessels did Ukraine strike across the 72-hour Novorossiysk operation? A 4B-7C-11. Lock in your answer. We'll give you the confirmed figure at the end. Drone Unit Beta targeted the escort tugboat Cutlass, moored at the outer harbor approach buoy position. She wasn't a warship in any conventional sense. A 52-meter civilian frame vessel fitted with a 30 cannon mount, a communications suite, and an anti-drone detection radar. Her role: shepherding Shadow fleet tankers through the outer harbor approach, coordinating with coastal defense to create a protected corridor. Without vessels like Cutlass, Shadow fleet tankers couldn't move safely. Destroy the escort infrastructure, and the tankers sit idle regardless of their own capability. Cutlass was struck at 11:52 p.m., 3 minutes after the patrol craft. The impact hit the forward bow section, detonating in a fuel storage compartment. Ukrainian intelligence intercepts, portions released publicly on July 30th, capture the moment the Cutlass commander reported to harbor control. His transmission, translated from Russian, includes the phrase that Ukrainian drone operators later described as the psychological center of the entire operation. They found us here too. The realization that the Azov corridor strategy had simply followed them to Novorossiysk, that there was no safe harbor, is audible in that transmission. The fourth drone of Wave 1 experienced a guidance anomaly at approximately 4 kilometers from its designated target and was diverted to a secondary objective, a fuel barge at the outer harbor staging area, struck at 12:04 a.m. It did not sink immediately, but intelligence imagery confirmed it non-operational. Fuel tanks ruptured and burning for the following 48 hours. Russian port authorities suspended all Shadow fleet tanker movements at 12:10 a.m. The order, according to intercepted communications, was issued by the harbor master in response to what he described as uncontrolled threat environment. Every tanker in the approach basin reversed course or held position. The export pipeline stopped. If you think tactics win wars, type Steel Horizon in the comments. Because what Ukraine just demonstrated is that you don't need a surface fleet to shut down a port. You need patience, intelligence, and engineering. Here's the take that will probably get pushback, but it needs to be said directly. Russia's decision to concentrate its remaining Black Sea escort assets at Novorossiysk without upgrading maritime drone detection infrastructure was not a miscalculation born of ignorance. It was a failure of institutional culture. Russian Naval Command received assessments indicating Ukrainian drone range improvements. Those assessments were deprioritized because accepting them would have required admitting that no safe operating zone existed within the Black Sea. Acknowledging that truth meant telling Moscow that export revenue was unprotectable. So they didn't acknowledge it. They built their defensive posture around a threat model they preferred to believe. Ukraine walked right through the gap. Wave 2 launched 34 hours after Wave 1, on the evening of July 30th. Russian Naval Command had made 2 decisions that Ukrainian intelligence was monitoring through signals intercepts. First, they repositioned remaining patrol craft to tighter defensive clusters around the inner harbor. Second, they attempted to establish a waterborne perimeter using commercial fishing vessels equipped with radar reflectors to create a detection screen. Both decisions were tactically understandable. Both were adaptations to Wave 1's attack pattern, and Wave 2 had been planned against Wave 1's anticipated Russian response. Put yourself in the position of a Ukrainian drone unit commander. Wave 1 confirmed 3 things. The radar gap on the southwestern approach works, the sea state-adapted guidance algorithm holds under operational conditions, and Russian response time from strike to harbor lockdown is approximately 23 minutes. Wave 2 was engineered around that window. 6 drones launched at 7:44 p.m. on July 30th. Sea conditions had improved significantly. Beaufort 2, ideal operating conditions. The drones ran at full speed, 42 knots. The attack began at 3:58 a.m. on July 31st. Wave 2 targeted 3 objectives. A second Vasily Baikov-class patrol vessel confirmed operational after Wave 1. A cluster of 3 escort tugboats moored at the Shadow Fleet staging pier, and a mobile fuel support pontoon. Critical infrastructure that Russian naval logistics had been using to refuel export vessels without bringing them into the main harbor. The patrol vessel was struck at 4:02 a.m. This time, Russian radar operators detected the incoming drones at approximately 2 kilometers, within the inner harbor's alert range. They activated active countermeasures. But those countermeasures couldn't focus on 6 simultaneous signals without degrading effectiveness against each individual track. All 6 Wave 2 drones hit their target windows within a 19-minute span. 2 of the 3 escort tugboats at the staging pier were struck. The third received damage assessed as non-critical. One drone's warhead detonated on the aft deck rather than below the waterline, disabling propulsion and communications but not sinking the vessel. The mobile fuel pontoon was struck at 4:17 a.m. and assessed as a total loss. The intercept. At 4:38 a.m. on July 31st, a Russian naval officer at Novorossiysk Port Command transmitted an assessment to Black Sea Fleet headquarters that Ukrainian intelligence captured and partially released on August 1st. The transmission is remarkable not for its tactical content but for what it reveals about the doctrinal collapse happening inside Russian naval command. Translated, the threat radius we were assigned does not correspond to actual Ukrainian capability. They are operating beyond every established parameter. We cannot establish a defensive perimeter if their ceiling is undefined. Request updated threat assessment and new operational protocols. The response from Fleet Headquarters arrived 47 minutes later. It did not contain updated threat parameters. It contained an order to maintain position and await further guidance. That 47-minute gap. That response. That is the institutional failure Ukraine's operation was designed to exploit. Not just the physical destruction of escort vessels, but the creation of a decision paralysis so complete that Russian Naval Command couldn't formulate a coherent response before Wave 3 arrived. What would NATO have done differently at Novorossiysk? Comment your operational assessment below. We read every serious tactical analysis that comes through. Wave 3 launched on August 2nd. Novorossiysk Shadow Fleet operations had been suspended for 4 days. Russian Naval Command had moved additional coastal patrol craft into the port's inner defense ring. Satellite imagery confirmed they were attempting to install additional radar systems on the outer breakwater. The installation was incomplete when Wave 3 arrived. Here's what this operation tells us about where this war is going. The Novorossiysk strike is not primarily a story about drones. It's a story about the compounding advantage of an organization that learns versus one that refuses to update its assumptions. Ukraine's naval drone units have been operationally active since 2022. Every strike, every failure, every partial success has fed back into an engineering and doctrine loop that continuously updates. Russia's maritime defense doctrine at Novorossiysk was built on parameters from 2024. That 2-year gap in adaptation is what 7 destroyed vessels represent. Wave 3 consisted of 4 drones targeting Shadow Fleet tankers themselves. Not to destroy them, but to demonstrate that the protection gap was now absolute. Ukrainian doctrine in this phase consistently prioritizes behavioral modification over pure kinetic destruction. Sinking every tanker in Novorossiysk harbor would be tactically dramatic. Demonstrating that no escort system can protect them reliably achieves something more durable. It changes the insurance calculation, the captain recruitment calculation, the port authority risk calculation. All 3 of those calculations now functionally exclude Novorossiysk from Shadow Fleet operations. 2 of the 4 Wave 3 drones struck Shadow Fleet tankers, one receiving significant damage to its engine room, one receiving hull damage sufficient to require emergency pumping operations. Neither sank. Both were confirmed non-operational for a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks. The other 2 drones struck the outer harbor approach mooring infrastructure, buoy systems, and approach lighting floats that escort vessels require for night navigation. Destroying maritime navigation infrastructure creates secondary disruption that outlasts the initial strike window. By August 3rd, the total assessment stood as follows: 7 vessels struck. 2 escort craft destroyed. The patrol vessel sunk in Wave 1 and Cutlass assessed as a constructive total loss. 3 vessels non-operational requiring significant repair. 2 vessels with moderate operational impact. 0 Ukrainian drone operators lost. The Shadow Fleet exit operation through Novorossiysk suspended indefinitely as of August 3rd. The financial impact calculation is substantial. Ukrainian economic analysts working from public data estimate that each week of Novorossiysk Shadow Fleet suspension represents between $180 million and $240 million in blocked Russian export revenue directly financing Russian military procurement. The suspension had been running for 6 days as of this analysis. The vessels require weeks of repair. The escort infrastructure that made those operations feel safe no longer exists in sufficient quantity to reconstitute credible protection. Something about the Cutlass commander's transmission still doesn't sit right. Not the fear in it, which is human and understandable, but the surprise. They found us here too. The entire Russian strategy at Novorossiysk was built on the idea that distance was protection, that if you moved the problem far enough away, it would stop following you. Ukraine spent 6 weeks proving that in modern maritime warfare, distance is not protection. Intelligence is not protection. Pattern is not protection. The only protection is genuine defense, depth, or unpredictability. Russia had abandoned both, pulling defense depth into the inner harbor, losing unpredictability through 6 weeks of observable routine. Here's the counterintuitive thing this operation establishes for every naval planner studying it. Russia's defensive adjustments after Wave 1 actively improved conditions for Waves 2 and 3. By pulling patrol assets into the inner harbor, they reduced outer approach patrol density precisely when they needed it most. By clustering escort tugboats at the staging pier, they created a target concentration. By deploying commercial fishing vessels as a radar screen, they added surface clutter that degraded their own operators' discrimination capability. Every tactically intuitive adjustment was operationally counterproductive. Was the decision to launch Wave 1 in Beaufort 4 sea conditions the right call? Every serious operator who has reviewed this operation says yes, but the margin was razor thin. 2 of the 6 planned drones didn't launch because of those conditions. If the weather system had been 2 knots stronger across the full route, Wave 1 could have lost cohesion entirely. Ukraine got the conditions it needed. That's partly engineering, the sea state algorithm, and partly the fortune that attaches itself to operations with thorough preparation. Could Russia have prevented this? The answer is yes, but only by doing something Russian military institutional culture has structurally resisted, genuinely updating threat parameters when intelligence suggests old parameters are wrong. They had the warning. The capability assessments were there. The decision to disbelieve them was made above the level of the commanders at Novorossiysk. The people who paid for that decision were the 11 crew members of Cutlass and the officers on that patrol vessel. Now, the answer to our quiz. How many vessels did Ukraine strike across the Novorossiysk operation? The answer is B7 vessels. 2 escort craft destroyed. 3 non-operational requiring significant repair. 2 Shadow Fleet tankers with serious damage. 7 strikes, 3 waves, 96 hours. 0 Ukrainian losses. One of Russia's last functioning export routes suspended indefinitely. That is the exchange ratio that modern maritime drone warfare is delivering in 2026. The tactical lesson this operation writes into modern doctrine is simple and severe. Range assumptions are the most dangerous assumptions in warfare. The moment you build a defensive posture around a maximum threat radius, you hand the attacker the exact specification needed to defeat you. Exceed the radius by any margin and the entire defensive architecture collapses, because it was never designed to fight. It was designed to prevent the adversary from reaching you. When prevention fails, there is no fallback. Novorossiysk's coastal batteries were real. Its radar systems were real. Its patrol craft were real. None of it mattered against a weapon system that had quietly exceeded the range threshold their entire calculation assumed. Will Russia reconstitute Novorossiysk export operations within 60 days? Comment yes or no, and tell us what you think they'll have to change to make it work. We read every serious breakdown. Was launching Wave 1 in degraded sea conditions the right decision? Could Russia have genuinely restructured Novorossiysk defenses to protect Shadow Fleet operations? And if you were commanding Russian Black Sea naval assets in that 47-minute window before fleet headquarters responded, what would you have ordered? Subscribe to Steel Horizon, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades, and because preparation defeats improvisation. Always. Real tactics. Real consequences. Steel Horizon. The outer harbor at Novorossiysk is quiet now. The tankers sit at anchor, going nowhere. The mooring buoys where Cutlass used to idle are empty. Somewhere in a fleet headquarters, a staff officer is composing an assessment of a threat radius that should have been updated 8 months ago. The wrecks lie in the shallows and the deep approach channels. Silent proof that in modern maritime warfare, distance is not safety, patterns are not protection, and assumptions that no one corrects eventually become the architecture of catastrophe. Stay vigilant.